you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today to oppose this partisan reconciliation bill. Republicans have named it the One Big Beautiful Bill, but you'd only use that kind of title if you were trying to hide something. And here's the simple truth. This bill takes health insurance and food assistance away from millions of Americans and gives President Trump's billionaire and millionaire friends giant tax cuts. And this bill, it would provide hundreds of billions of dollars in tax giveaways to the country's 902 billionaires and millionaires, while kicking 17 million Americans off their health insurance. Just weigh the balance. 902 beneficiaries with extraordinary tax deductions and tax benefits versus denial of health care to 17 million Americans. It doesn't balance. And despite slashing health care, somehow this bill will add trillions of dollars to our national debt. It will further weaken our financial position in the world. It will indeed have many countries wondering if the United States is, as it has been since the end of World War II, the place to put their resources, their investments, their reserves. This could have profound fiscal and monetary implications for the United States. And if you tie that together with this tariff battle, we are headed economically in the wrong direction as we are socially. This bill is loaded with outrageous special interest giveaways and President Trump's personal political priorities. For example, $7.5 billion for wealthy developers to use for luxury housing and other high-priced developments at a time when affordable housing for working families is a crisis in every state in the country. $1.7 billion for gun makers who will be able to sell silencers, sawed-off shotguns, short-barreled rifles, and other very dangerous weapons and components tax-free, making our streets more dangerous for police and for the American people, and indeed, especially for the police, because they're the first responders. They're the ones that are typically going to the door wondering if the person behind that door has an automatic weapon or some other weapon designed not to hunt or shoot, but to kill. Hundreds of millions of dollars in new tax cuts for extraordinarily wealthy oil and gas companies, and $40 million for a Garden of Heroes, a sculpture garden to honor President Trump's favorite historical personalities. And at the same time, it slashes the budget for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which makes sure that shady payday lenders, mortgage lenders, and banks don't fleece American families. And in particular, the military division of the CFPB protects men and women in the uniform of the United States. We were able to pass an interest cap of 36% for active duty personnel. And that is going to be ignored because there's no one to enforce it. And we are going to see, as we have in the past, our soldiers, sailors, airmen, guardians exploited, systematically exploited by all those little automobile shops and payday lenders and everything else that surrounds every military fort base in this country. It's a tale as old as time. My Republican colleagues showering the rich with tax benefits and prioritizing favored industries and friends. President Bush joined with the Republican Congress to do that. Of course, I opposed it. And well, by the way, when President Bush did that, we were projected to have, over the next 10 years, a multi-trillion-dollar surplus Of course, this legislation will lead us to a multi-trillion-dollar deficit. And it's interesting because when I was younger, the Republicans all associated themselves with fiscal responsibility, balanced budgets, surpluses. That's not the case. President Trump exacerbated the situation in his first term by his grand giveaway. But this time, President Trump and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are depriving millions of Americans of their health care coverage to pay for it. They are intent on punishing the most vulnerable Americans in this bill simply for the crime of being poor. In fact, in many cases, despite working very long hours and being poor. I came here to Congress, to the Senate, after serving my country in the U.S. Army, as the President did with great distinction in the United States Navy as a Navy SEAL. I came here to serve my constituents and improve the lives of average Americans. And I think most of my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans alike, came with the same goal. And according to press reports, a few of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are starting to realize that this bill is going to do great damage to their constituents. One Republican colleague has warned that this bill could leave 600,000 of his constituents without health care coverage and blow a $38 billion hole in his state's budget. That would be a devastating effect. One of the other aspects of this attack on our health care system is there's some people that believe, well, Medicaid doesn't touch me. It certainly does. Because when you extract that much money from the health care system, what will private health insurance do? They'll raise their rates. Everyone will be paying more. And some won't be able to afford it. They'll have to go without coverage. And that is going to be a tragedy for this country. Now, knowing the damage this bill is going to do, one must ask, why would anyone support this? But this legislation is more than just numbers. I've heard from countless Rhode Islanders who are concerned about these cuts during meetings, in letters, when I bump into them at the grocery store or the pharmacy. They've been telling me about how Medicaid has helped them and their families. I've been meeting, for example, with Christina from Smithfield, Rhode Island, for many years. Her daughter, Lauren, was born with cystic fibrosis and has endured countless hospitalizations, procedures, medications, and other challenges as she navigates life with this disease. Christina, Lauren, and their family have private insurance. But Medicaid also helps cover the expenses not covered by private insurance for people with serious illnesses who are not able to work. When President Trump and congressional Republicans began proposing these cuts to Medicaid, Christina told me, and I quote, "Lauren was born with CF, a rare genetic progressive disease which affects her lungs, GI, and endocrine systems. I had no idea we carried this gene. When Lauren was born, she spent a month in the hospital. We almost lost her. When she was 5, she contracted a germ that put her in the hospital for a month and almost killed her. Her lung function fell to 70%. At 13, I thought she was going to die. Her hospital stays were every 3 months for 2 weeks with IV treatments. Her lung function fell to 30%. With one of the medicines for CF, she was able to finally get her lung function back to 65% at 23 years old. She still suffers every day. Just trying to breathe is difficult. If she catches the common cold, it could put her in the hospital. She has had a hard time keeping weight on, and her GI is a disaster. She spent hours in the bathroom. She developed CF-related diabetes, which always puts her in danger. Every day, is rigorous treatments and medications just to stay alive. It is with the help of the NIH and the FDA that she is still alive. Please do not make these cuts. If Medicaid is cut, when she is 26, 2 years from now, she will have no way to pay for all of her hospitalizations, medications, and treatments. Few could afford to keep her alive. It is this simple. Without Medicaid, she will die. We need your help. Carolina from Central Falls, Rhode Island, shared similar concerns for her daughter. My daughter has special needs, and we rely on Medicaid for her needs. Not having Medicaid would create a sinkhole for us. People with profound autism need lifetime, 24/7 care. As you consider budget cuts, it is important to me, as your constituent, that you work to ensure that this vulnerable population has access to the critical supports that it needs to survive. I will be looking to you for your courage and leadership. Indeed, and now we're looking across the aisle for courage and leadership to reject this flawed bill. I received an email from one constituent, Wally, in Cranston, Rhode Island. She is a 71-year-old retiree on Medicare. Her husband is 72 with Alzheimer's disease, living in a nursing home under hospice care and relying on Medicaid for his health care. She wrote to me that she was, quote, terrified at all the cuts to programs and services that she and her husband so desperately rely on. Without Medicaid, she wonders if she or her husband would be able to continue receiving care. I also heard from Diane in Coventry, Rhode Island, whose daughter gets life-saving care through Medicaid. Diane said, Medicaid is important to me personally. Medicaid matters to me and my family. My 15-year-old daughter suffered a brain bleed and a stroke at the age of 5. It came out of nowhere and was very unexpected. She has spent a lot of time in the hospital, rehabilitation services, doctor's offices, appointments, etc. over the past almost 10 years. Medicaid allows her to be home and taken care of on a daily basis. Without Medicaid, she would not be able to receive hospital-level care at home. She wouldn't have a wheelchair or any other durable medical equipment. She wouldn't be able to get her life-saving medications or the nourishment she needs through her G-tube. Please, I urge you to save Medicaid, not only for my family, but for millions of others. All of our lives depend on it. Now, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle may say, we're not going to cut these people's Medicaid. We're just going after the fraudsters, the freeloaders who aren't working. Now, who exactly are these fraudsters and freeloaders? Is it the elderly patient who needs expensive nursing home care? Is it the child with a serious chronic health condition? Should we cut off these people's access to health care because they can't work? They physically cannot work? Or because the constant paperwork requirements got lost in the shuffle? Let's be clear. If my colleagues were serious about eliminating fraud, they would be providing states with more resources to investigate questionable claims and bad actors. Medicaid coverage is not extravagant, it is a lifeline. If my colleagues were sincere in their claim that these cuts are about protecting the program, quote, for the people who need it the most, as the majority leader has claimed, then they would be investing the so-called savings back into Medicaid instead of blowing it on tax cuts for the well-off. Instead, this bill is cutting funding to states for Medicaid, and states will have no choice but to pick and choose who will get access to care. But don't take my word for it. The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, CBO, estimates that this bill will cause nearly 17 million Americans to lose their health insurance. 17 million people. That's not fraud. It's just making it harder for people to get health care. On top of that, even if you're one of the lucky ones who gets to keep your Medicaid, will you still be able to get it? Nursing homes rely on Medicaid. More than 6 in 10 nursing home residents in Rhode Island are on Medicaid. As Medicaid funding is cut, what will nursing homes do? I imagine some will have to close their doors or dramatically reduce the number of beds. So you could be one of these fairly well-to-do Rhode Islanders trying to get mom in the Medicaid home, the nursing home, I should say, and you're willing to pay, but if it's closed, or there's only 5 beds where there used to be 20, she's going to be where, in my generation, grandparents were, in the living room, in a hospital bed, being cared for, in those days, typically by your mother. So this approach to Medicaid is going to touch every aspect of American life. And the same can be said about the community health care centers. Medicaid makes up a huge portion of the operating budget for community health centers, which provide primary, dental, and behavioral care to more than 200,000 Rhode Islanders. That's roughly 1 in 5 Rhode Islanders. It's hard enough to find a doctor now. It will only get harder if a community health center closes its doors and thousands of patients don't have a doctor anymore. And where do all those patients end up when they can't get routine care? The emergency room. That means there will be lines out the door, and if you have a serious health event and need to get in, you better get used to waiting a long time. This is not how a health system is supposed to run. And in Rhode Island, our health system is already on the brink. People are just getting by. People are waiting in the hallways of ERs for a bed upstairs. People are spending days on the phone trying to find a doctor. We should be making these things better, not worse. But again, Republicans' main priority seems not the physical or financial health of everyday Americans. It is providing massive tax cuts to President Trump's billionaire and millionaire friends. There's certainly nothing wrong with being successful, and there's nothing wrong with wealth. That's something that has been part of the American dream since our beginning. But what it requires is opportunity. And one of the fundamental opportunities it requires is good health and good education. And what this bill will do is destroy our health care system and force the states to make dramatic cuts to the education system. We are shutting down opportunity in America while we enrich the wealthy elite. The American dream, as I believe it, is about the middle class and a government that's focused on them, not taking $1 trillion from Medicaid so Republicans can gift to those who've already benefited from many other gifts. Mr. President, let's put the enormity of this transfer to the wealthiest in perspective. There are about 128 million households in America. Yet somehow this bill gives the top 0.1% of households a $250,000 tax cut, a giveaway that's over 3 times larger than what the median American household makes in a year. When confronted with this point, Republicans consistently try to hide the ball. Middle and working class Americans are getting tax cuts too, they say. Who cares if the rich gets richer? Well, the Senate bill raises taxes on the lowest income Americans, the same families from whom Republicans are ripping away health care and other benefits. While we are voting on this bill without a full analysis of its impact on households, the Congressional Budget Office found that the House-passed version would take around $1,600 away from these lowest income households each year after accounting for tax changes and benefit cuts. And it's not just low-income Americans. Researchers at Penn's Wharton School of Business have found that most Americans lose money under the House bill in future years, too. I want to be crystal clear. We need to reform our tax care system. We need to make it fairer for working Americans, not just for the ultra-wealthy. We hear from people so often that government is broken. They're right. Our tax system is unfair and needs reform. But giving the top 1/10 of 1% of Americans an extra $250,000 every year is not fixing the government. It's just adding to the sense of unfairness and brokenness that so many citizens feel. We can do a bipartisan tax bill that is both fully paid for and that helps average Americans. In fact, we almost did that last summer when the House passed a tax bill 357 to 70 that would have extended the child tax credit and reinstated tax cuts for businesses without increasing the deficit. 48 bipartisan senators voted for that bill in this very chamber, but it was blocked because Republican leaders wanted to pass something like this bill before us today. My Republican colleagues have drafted a bill that is neither paid for nor helps most Americans. Worst of all, they have chosen to take from the poor and the middle class and the working class to give to billionaires. This bill is very bad policy. It's almost un-American if you believe that the essence of America, as expressed by one of our greatest presidents, Abraham Lincoln, was to give every person a fair chance in the race of life. This bill denies that chance to millions and millions of Americans while enhancing and filling the pockets of the wealthiest. And I oppose it. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
People watching this home, they don't know what's going on. They're going about their lives. They're just, all they know is that there's a big bill, there's some tax stuff in it, there's some spending stuff in it, some border stuff, and that's about all they know. So why am I here? Because the House passed that bill, imperfect, but I will call passable by definition. We sent it to the Senate. The Senate is making the bill worse as we speak. The Senate is making decisions, both policy decisions and what's called going through a process over there to see if it's language that's supposed to be in a budget-related reconciliation package. We call it a bird process. They're pulling pieces out of it. The bill is getting worse. Now let me see if I can put it in basic terms. This chart's not going to mean much to most people back home. You don't even need to look at all the bars. It gets kind of complex. But I just want it to be real simple. This orange line on this chart, and people in the gallery, you can't see it, but imagine an orange line on a XY graph. That orange line says that under the House bill, on a dynamic basis, what does that mean? That accounting for economic growth, accounting for the tax policies, accounting for what we believe will happen, we would have about additional $72 billion of deficit spending over 10 years. Sadly, $72 billion is kind of a rounding error when you're talking about 10 years. In other words, it's close to break even. We would cut taxes, we would reduce spending, we would get economic growth, and we believe we would add nothing more to the deficit. Now, here's the problem. Adding nothing more to the deficit means we still have deficits. We still have $1.8 trillion to $2 trillion a year in deficits. So I voted for a bill that will perpetuate $1.8 trillion deficits. And I hated doing it. But I did it because in this process, in this political environment, to get the reforms that we were getting to Medicaid, to get the reforms that we were getting to terminate 60% of the Green New Scam subsidies undermining our grid, to get the tax cut extensions for hardworking Americans. To me, it was worth doing that when I thought credibly, believably, we would not be adding to the deficit and get those important reforms. But here we are. The Senate, in its infinite wisdom over in the House of Lords, they are embarking on focusing on what we would have anticipated they would focus on, which is just the tax cut side for the most part. They're backing away from the spending cuts, the spending restraint. They're backing away from the reforms that we think makes the math work. And therein lies the problem. You want to know why we're $37 trillion in debt as a nation? It's because too often my Republican colleagues have never met a tax cut they didn't want to advance, while then campaigning on balancing the budget and cutting spending that they never want to vote for. We can't do that. We have to actually lead. In a Republican form of government, there are 435 of us, representing 30-something million Americans. I represent about 750,000 people. In a Republican form of government, I'm supposed to take the hard votes. I'm supposed to go back to my constituents and say, well, we're doing this and this and this. We think it's good. I know you wanted this, but we can't have that because we're $37 trillion in debt. I go back to this chart. There's a big yellow bar over here with flames on top. It shows almost $1 trillion of additional deficit that the Senate bill would add if the policies they are currently debating in the Senate are adhered to, meaning they got rid of a lot of our savings and they made certain tax cuts more permanent. They extended them. I support making those tax cuts permanent and extending them, but not without the spending reductions necessary to get us back to deficit neutrality or deficit savings.